You know what? I'm too lazy to do an intro. I'm gonna try painting a Magmadroth. So yeah. Like I said, I'm too lazy to do an intro, so we're gonna paint up this Magmadroth. Now, I have Fyreslayers. A lot of them came decently pre-painted, but this is one that I'm very interested in. Now, specifically, the color scheme that I'm going to be going for is kind of the black scales with like the fiery inferno underside, and in between, I have a couple ideas, but hey, enough talk. Let's paint.
Alright, so let's get started. So first things first, I primed the model black, and then I did more of a Zenithal spot highlight with my airbrush. As you can see, I picked out the tongue, certain parts of the scales, certain things that we're just going to want to draw and get more color from. But we're obviously going to hop on to our next step. This is a speed paint, so what is a speed paint without a little slap chop? So we're just going to take our pure white, or Vallejo model white, and we're going to take the large dry brush. The reason we're going to pick up a large dry brush is because this is a large Magmadroth. Makes sense, right? So we're just going to bump our camera a little bit. So I'm just going to apologize right now. We bumped the camera a few times, but I digress. Here we are. So we're going to get that, wipe off a little bit of the excess, and we're going to start picking out the raised areas. Now you can see that when I'm dry brushing, I'm intentionally trying to dry brush against the edges specifically. Now with most models you can kind of just dry brush and you'll pick up whatever edges, but in the case of this Magmadroth, we really want to get the edges of those scales, and those scales are directional. So it's going to be very important that when we are dry brushing, that we are dry brushing against the grain. Next up, we're going to take a little bit of our Imperial Fist contrast yellow, and the reason we're going to use this is we're going to push it through the airbrush, and of course make sure to test it on your hand, and then we're going to hit some of those spot highlights. So specifically, I'm going to do a little bit of the base. Now, I'm just going to cover this right now. The base is nowhere near done. Like, I've got a lot of steps to do for it, but we're going to focus in on the main stuff. So we're going to go in towards those gills. I think that's what those would be, gills, vents, whatever you want to call them, and we're just going to pick out some of those areas, including the tongue, let a little bit of the color kind of splash over the mouth, because obviously this is a giant lava lizard. It glows when it's on fire, and it's on fire all the time. So just making sure we're getting all that, picking up those side scales near the neck, things like that. But we really just want to try and get a nice coat on that, and this Imperial Fist yellow is going to do a ton for us on top of that Zenithal. So I'm just going to go ahead and apply that all over and in the spots that I want it, and then we'll hop on to the next step. Alright, now that I've got all the yellow down and I'm still bumping the camera, we're going to grab some Gryph-hound orange and some contrast medium. So, what's the reason for this? Primarily because we want to reduce the Gryph-hound orange so that it flows into the recesses here. Now, there's going to be a little bit of a time jump here because I did this all a little too quickly, and you'll see some paint kind of come up, a little bit of the primer. Just hopped onto too many steps a little too quickly, but you'll get an idea for it. So this is why we fade to black and come back to it, because this was about a day later after we let the paint dry a little bit more, kind of set in a little bit better. But that also meant that our mixture stayed on the wet palette for longer and became a lot more watery. So we're just going to take bits and pieces of that, and we're going to focus on the spots where we want that kind of orange lava-y glow, like the tongue, like the scales, like the gills. But because it sat on the wet palette for about 24 hours, and you can see some of the white there that we're going to cover up a little bit, because it sat on there, it's going to be a little more reduced than before, but it's still going to work. We're just going to keep applying layers and, slowly build it up. The hardest part was dealing with the tongue, because the tongue, as we all know, is pointed down, and as far as I remember, gravity still exists. Does gravity still exist? Yeah, it does. Okay, but we're going to go into those side gills there, those scales over there. I kind of wanted a Magmadroth that had kind of a glow coming from its neck. And so I took some of that orange mixture and I just kind of repeatedly kept pushing it in there, and then I would let it dry, and then I'd come back to it. And you just keep doing this over and over again. But again, like I said, I had a situation where mine needed to dry for 24 hours, and so therefore my mixture stayed on the palette for a bit longer. But we go for the belly, and we're just going to set all that in and get that glow effect, and then we'll hop on to the next step. Now that we got that glow effect, we're going to work on the scales. So we're going to use some Flesh Terror's Red. I chose to go with Flesh Terrors because I wanted a little bit more darker scales, but we're going to do this in a 2-to-1 mixture of contrast medium. So I did 4 drops there and 2 drops of contrast medium here. Again, contrast medium is going to be our friend here because it's going to settle into those recesses. I mean, contrast already does that, but this is going to really help assist the process significantly. So we're going to mix that in with our brush, and we're just going to start applying it all over the scales. And we're primarily doing the thinner scales, more of the skin scales, I guess, is what you'd call it. But this is going to be a part where you're going to want to take your time and be careful. I know it's a speed paint, you want to get this thing done and dusted, but promise you, this is exactly what you're going to want to do. You're not going to want to spill the color onto any of the other scales. You're just going to want it to settle into these other scales, the more skin... It's a lizard, okay? Skin scales, whatever. It works, but we're just going to take that Flesh Terror's Red and start applying that all over the spots that we want it. Try and avoid the spines, try and avoid the other scales that we're going to have be black later, and we're just going to start covering all of that. Alright, now that we got all those scales done, you see it darkened down real nicely. We still got the nice little glow effect, but we're going to add a little bit of blending to it because we want that blend to happen a little bit more. So we're going to just take a little bit of that. It's still reduced down with the medium, so you just add a little bit of the red to the top or wherever you want the spot to go in, and then you just take your brush, dip it in some water, and you just move it back and forth to blend it in. It's a nice little step, but it adds a ton. So, on to the black scales. Now, I know what you're thinking. We're just totally going to use just pure Black Templar, right? No, because again, the contrast medium, as featured right here, is going to do a ton for us. It's going to really help pull that away a little bit. Again, we're doing that 2-to-1 mixture. We're just going to move it together with our brush. I'm not using a super large brush. I'm not trying to have it spill out anywhere I don't want it, and so I'm just going to start picking out the scales, and you'll see that it kind of has a little bit closer to a gray, but it's still going to be very black. It's just something, it's just a personal preference. Now, if I wanted to go pure black, I'd go Black Legion or something like that, but in this case, I really love the finish of the Black Templar. I think it has a very naturalistic black to it. And I think it works really well with the scales. It settles very nicely, especially with that contrast medium. So I'm just going to pick out all those bigger, thicker plates of scales, and I'm going to get that with the Black Templar. Alright, now that we've got that done, I'm going to keep knocking that camera because, you know, I just figured, whoa! But we're just going to get Gargaxur, which is personally one of my favorite contrast browns, and we're just going to get that giant strap down the middle. The thing that allows the Rune Father, or Rune Son, or Rune Smiter to, you know, sit on the Magmadroth without falling off. No contrast medium necessary here. As you can see, there's plenty of runes in there. That's really going to make it really easily. Again, just taking our time. Make sure you stay in the lines. But those scales aren't done. No. We're going to take that War Paints Pure Red, and we are going to, from the Army Painter, and we are just going to dry brush. Now, it's going to be very subtle. This is going to take a pinch of time. But again, we're going back to that dry brushing, and as you can see, we're just picking up the scales just a little bit. I still want them to be dark. I still want them to be that nice, like, deeper finish. but I want to pick up some of those edges and really draw attention to those scales, including on those fins there. So we're just going to take our time, go around the model, find some of the raised areas, and we're just going to dry brush that pure red and pop it up a little. Magmadroth, use tail whip. Oh, yep, too efficient, too perfect. Sorry, I had to put that in here for a bit. So now that we got that, it's time to get the gold. In this case, I'm going to be using 2 thin coats dragon gold. This is one of my personal favorite golds. I still love a lot of other golds, but this one always just speaks to me. I'm going to use a nice thin brush, and we're, again, very important, all the skin, the scales, it's pretty much done. We're just going to take our time. We're going to be nice and blurry here, but we're going to track down every single one of the runes that are hiding on this Magmadroth, and we're just going to make sure that we pick them out, including, and do not forget these, the ones in the fins. They have some runes that are etched into the fins, so underneath and up above. So just make sure you use the thin brush, take your time, and get all that gold. Alright, and so here's where we're at now. We've got the gold picked out. I also picked out the gold on the strap and the actual throne. Let's call it the throne. But, you know, basically I did a little bit of the throne. I just used big silicanum gray with some contrast medium to do that really quickly. But we're focusing on the Magmadroth. So again, just made sure that I picked out all the gold. But I still want those fins to pop. So how am I going to do that? I'm going to add some Warpaint's Fnac Burning Ore, because I thought the red would sit really nicely, but I needed something more dynamic. There was something missing. So I took my small dry brush, wiped off a little bit of that burning ore, tested it on my hand, and now we're just going to slowly bring up the scales. Now, if you angle your brush just right, it's not going to get too much on the gold, or it's not going to do enough to really properly mess up the gold. If you thin it down just right, you're going to slowly pick up those raised areas, you know, and start bringing up that orange highlight to it without going too crazy. It's not going to be overbearing. It's not going to, you know, it's not going to throw off the dynamics of the entire model, but just doing it, you can kind of see it adds that nice little small fiery effect to the fins, and that's exactly what I wanted. So I just took that burning ore and I just went over with a couple passes. You know, sometimes I'd start on one, move to another, and then come back, but you just take your time, pick up some of those edges, and really make it pop. And that's our Magmadroth finish. So this was my very first Magmadroth. Overall, I am actually very happy with how this turned out. I'm pleasantly surprised. There was a lot of tricks and tips that I had to come up with to make it work, but hey, I think it looks pretty good. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Feel free to like, share, and subscribe. And of course, most importantly, I've been Tattooed Tabletop. Now go paint something.